Hi, good evening everyone. 60 years ago this year, I left Holland-on-Sea with my parents and my sister, and we moved to Hadley in Suffolk. That's the family home, going back at least to the 1700s. In 1928, my grandfather brought his family from Ipswich to Little Holland, now Holland-on-Sea. We were builders, and grandfather set up a building business because there's plenty of land at Little Holland at that time. Anyway, at Elstein Nursing Home in Victoria Road, Clacton, 1943, I was born. No NHS in those days, and in my father's diary, 5 nights later, he wrote, "Roger went through his first air raid tonight." So what start I had in this world. So my memories, really, and related to all this, 1943 to 1965 when I left, because those first few years I've got no memory at all. But I grew up in a world of great austerity, particularly the late 40s, going right through into the 50s, when rationing was still going in 1954, Britain was still recovering from the wartime. 1960s was a great social change, as you all well know. But the 1950s was a great era for Clacton for holidays. Perhaps not as great as between the two world wars, but it's very close, I think. The 50s was a great era for holidays. And it's before most people aspired or were able to travel abroad. It was unheard of. You had a British seaside holiday. And also, that one holiday of a week or a fortnight was something to look forward to the whole year. For many people, life was quite mundane, everyday life. As I mentioned before, austerity. But that week at Clacton or any seaside was magical. Here at Clacton, you had the beach, the sea, you had the pier with all its amusements, you had the seafront gardens, you had theatres, amusements, cinemas, shops. It was all here. A splendid era, and I grew up in all that time. And still, in the 1950s, I would say that the economy of Clacton-on-Sea was principally the seaside season. It's not today, still a major part, but nothing like it was in the past, because Clacton was founded in 1871 as a holiday resort, a seaside resort. It was very much staying in the 1950s. So we're going to go, what we're going to do, we're going to look at some of the theatres in Clacton, and I shall be giving some of my memories of the shows I went to see and some of the people. And particularly at the end, the last theatre will be the Savoy in Rosebery Road, and where we regularly went to, and there's lots of memories there. So are you ready for a little journey?
Yay!
Well, Venetian Bridge, 1920s time, that's where you came, that's when you had your photograph taken on holiday, all dressed up of course, and having your photograph taken was something we get so used to, like digital cameras, click away, roll of film in those days, so having your photograph taken was quite something. And as we know, Clacton-on-Sea developed from 1871 within the large parish of Great Clacton. And at the top there, you can see Great Clacton village, and the seaside farm developed Peterbluff, and the pier was the first construction. We should say a landing stage. And one of the early entertainments was on the beach for pierrots, these little stages they set up amongst all the holiday makers, and they were very popular. And one were the Yorkshire pierrots, over here many years, and note, up to date and thoroughly refined. Mrs. Fullen looks a little bit very happy, does she? Mrs. Fullen here, doesn't look very happy really. But, would you believe this is August, can't remember the date now, 1911 or 1912, a summer storm. As you can see on the right there there's the stage, and here's all the seating, the people here. Along the top there, that's packed with people observing this great storm, and the pier, all the way along there, is lined with people watching this summer storm in August. So climate change, severe weather, is nothing new as such. But generally it was nice and sunny, and you could promenade along the cliff top. There's nice Edwardian ladies and their children here. Right, you can see on the right the pier. 1893 is a pier pavilion. I really want to concentrate on the bandstand of 1899. Bands were very popular, but sometimes, like today, it can be a bit breezy, can't it? And the musicians were losing their music, it's blowing away. So they erected some like perspex panels on the far southwestern side to help protect. But it wasn't entirely satisfactory, and they had a great scheme to dig a big hole on the cliff top, and thinking about it, how risky to excavate a big hole on the edge of a cliff. What they did, it worked, and they put the bandstand down. In the meantime, of course, electricity had come to Clacton. And you can imagine here, as you can see on this postcard view, all lit up, and the band playing, and large attendances they used to get for different concerts. And during the summertime, lots of military bands were invited down to play during the daytime and the evenings. And they called these the winter gardens. Clacton District Council, 1935 time, proposed a further extension here with this grand facade. That is still there today. And I love that car. It looks a real American car, Bonnie and Clyde type. And the new stage was formed there, and you can see all the people here. I was one of them, and the other side, there's a handful of people that paid. That's a consequence. People stood outside free, but very few went in. So the bandstand, the bandstand was not particularly successful for the council, but it was there for many, many years, and indeed still is, and it's got a new life now as well. And you had people like Monty Montgomery there in 1957, all a bit crazy, or perhaps one of the great names of Clacton entertainment was Ronnie Mills with his band, which were there for many years, 1955 here. And Ronnie had some very good extra jobs, because he'd interview the contestants for the Ideal Holiday Girl, Clacton Carnival Queen, etc. And in the winter time, he would be a toastmaster in London, well, all over the country, I understand, and very well respected. So Ronnie Mills, one of the great names of Clacton. But it wasn't just that part. You had the pavilion. It was a separate part. Nowadays, it's amusements and Armstrong's restaurant, you might know, but it's a separate theatre. Wintertime, they had indoor bowls there, but in the summertime again, it became a theatre. And 1965, the Dancing Waters, that was the big hit of that year. That really took Clacton by storm. Quite simple in one way, jets of water, coloured lights, and music all coordinated. And they had shows throughout the day, at a little interval, but throughout the day we had a show. And as I say, it really was the star attraction in Clacton that summer season. Going back a bit, 1906, the Palace. Started off very well, but in my day it looked a bit sad really. It wasn't quite a success. And on the extreme right you can see the Martello Tower, which is still there, Tower Road. So the hospital side is partly on this area now. The grand facade, as you can see behind at right angles the theatre, and there's one of the bills for one of the performances there. And at the back you had all sorts of scenes from around the world, really, and another bandstand with a palace orchestra. And what a fine body of men they are as well. A large number. You all recognise where you are, Clacton Town Hall. When this was built and opened in 1931, Clacton was only just about 60 years old. Started from scratch, greenfield site, and the Clacton Urban District Council, something like 30 odd years, 35 years or so. What a statement of confidence that building is. We get used to seeing it, but it's a large building. That grand portico with the columns going into it, the great theatre roof you can see there. So it really should, I think, that Clacton, the council saw great confidence in the town as a seaside resort, which it was, of course. And here's a newspaper cutting from the actual opening in 1931. Now, one of my first little memories now, not going back to 1931, this would be, I think, early 60s or late 50s. On the wireless, because we used to listen to the wireless a lot in those days, but on a Friday night, there's a programme called Friday Night is Music Night, from 8 o'clock to 9, I believe, sort of light classical music. And the conductor was Wilhelm Towski. One week, it came to Clacton, the town hall, and I had a ticket, and I went, and it was a live broadcast. And I remember, in my perhaps childish way, that when I clapped at the end of each piece of music, people all over the country would be hearing my clap. Wilhelm Towski, lovely name. And of course we can't forget the Westcliff Theatre, very much there today, and this is in the early stages before the present building was built. Area view, top right, St James Church, you can see the covered in now. And still doing a summer show, which is coming up fairly soon, the longest running in the country. So the Westcliff still keeping that tradition going. And in my time, the different programmes, I must admit we didn't go there too often to the Westcliff. I remember one year was Tommy Trinder, but it's fading a little bit. This is when people started to travel abroad somewhat, and they brought in Tommy Trinder, a great comedian, and I want to bring in lots of little catchphrases and tag names this evening, and his catchphrase was, "You lucky people!" He had quite a rough voice, Tommy Trinder. And because Will Hammer was very much involved in local theatres as well, here with Jack Payne, Sunshine and Smiles, 1950. Look the size of the cast there, all those performers. And some of you might know Will Hammer, Hammer House of Horror films, sort of B movies at the cinema. And there's always speciality acts, and Joan Hine was there for many shows she performed at. Now we come to the pier. As I mentioned earlier, most people, although we had day trippers always, but people came for a week or a fortnight's holiday, and they stayed in anything from a tent to a caravan, to bed and breakfast, to guest houses, private hotels and larger hotels. But any of those, generally they went back for an evening meal or tea, and then people would come out again in the evening and promenade along, and you had lights along the cliff top. The pier and the Still Stella was all lit up. The Clacton took on a different, what's the word I'm looking for? Different atmosphere in the evening, especially into August when the lights were starting to fade a bit. But on the pier, of course, there are more theatres. Starting in the centre, we got the pier pavilion I mentioned. Now to the left there is Bertram Children's Theatre, and then we got the Rambler concert party outside there. So So let's have a look at each of those. There's Clown Bertram and his bright young things. He was an immediate success in the 1920s, and Ernest Kingsman, the owner of the pier, and at that time expending a huge amount of money upgrading the pier, built Clown Bertram his own theatre, about 500 seats. And there'd be huge queues waiting for the shows and the talent shows. And there's Clown Bertram at the far end. You probably wouldn't be allowed to pick up a child today, would you? Sadly. But children were just attracted to him, and he brought out their natural talents. And of course, the summer season in Clacton was quite short, June to about mid-September, less than half a year. And remember I said the economy of the town relied on the season, so many performers had things elsewhere in the winter time. And this is the radio again, the wireless. Some of you might remember the programme In Town Tonight. This is from the Clacton Gazette paper, Clown Bertram here. And they call him the one and only. And he was a very noted performer. Then the other side of the pier, open air, was the Rambler concert party. Top right, Gordon Henson, I think it's 1932, started the show. And they claimed afterward to be the last of the traditional pierrots, as they were. The top, as they are, 1964. On the left is Gordon Henson. The lady in the middle, I always remember, Claire Ruane, very vivacious lady, like comedienne. And some years ago, I found out her age is much older than we all thought as children. Of course, didn't pay to go in. The Ramblers was enclosed by large canvas screens and metal poles, and it was fixed to the metal poles, the canvas, taut, but there's a little gap. So we looked through, as I say, Claire Rain was one of our favourites. And the lower picture, I think it's pre-war, but you can see just how close the audience sat to the stage. And they are sitting in the director's type chairs. Post-war, they were deck chairs. Again, large numbers. The numbers of people coming down to Clacton, especially bank holidays, was quite remarkable. And then the Jolly Roger Theatre, as it became known. Again, we didn't go there very often, we did go to the shows there. It looked a bit run down to me, but the only entrance and access, that long flight of metal stairs. Today, for people with mobility problems, but that's how it was then, and that's the only access up to the theatre. Should it be wet, then the Ramblers couldn't perform outside. They would transfer in for the morning and afternoon performance in the Jolly Roger Theatre. And the last one was the Ocean Theatre and the Ocean Review. Arguably, in the 50s, and pre-war of course, the big summer show at Clacton. And it said that those who got the contract to perform there, it's like getting a West End theatre contract. Ernest Kingsman, who I mentioned, who really founded the modern pier after going into liquidation in the First World War. He expended huge amounts of money. Sadly, he died in 1942. But his wife, Mrs. Ernest Kingsman, died then. The ladies took on the name of their husband. So Mrs. Ernest Kingsman, she was a good businesswoman as well, and she presented the Ocean Review. And I've been told every performance she would sat in the front row, right in the middle, and have her eyes on every performer. And if they weren't up to scratch, they knew about it. They had to be top-rate performances every evening. Some little memories about the Ocean Theatre. 2 shows, changing on the Thursday night, so people on holiday would go to both shows. The entrance was in the corner from the pier. You went in diagonally in the corner. And one of my memories there was 1,275 seats, often sold out. Most uncomfortable seats in Clacton. And you sat in a hole. They hadn't been altered for years. Or as I say, I've been very rich ones. And because each seat had an ashtray fixed to it. Now during the daytime, on the pier side, on the side of the theatre, there were large folding windows, so zigzagged out and opened up. And it had 2 purposes. People smoked in those days, and the idea was to get a good blow of air through to clear the air ready for the evening performance. But also, it was promotional. People on the pier during the daytime looked in, they saw the great stage there, all the seating, and that was like, oh, perhaps we might go there tonight or tomorrow night. So it had two purposes. One of the performances I remember, something new with ultraviolet light. They had a troupe of dancers, and they wore brilliant colours like pinks and yellows and blues, etc. And the men, their white shirts, under this ultraviolet light, show up absolutely brilliantly. We'd never seen anything quite like that before. And the second part of their routine, they all had sort of black catsuits on, with the ribs and spine and leg bones of a skeleton. And they came on, and all you saw were the bones dancing. And what's the music they played? Them bones, them bones, them dry bones. Wally Dunn, on the captain's own, he was often performed there, and he had the tag word to him, silly but happy. And then towards the end of the evening performance, they'd have a whole medley of songs. Now remember, people are on holiday, and many people came from the west end of Essex, London, Hertfordshire, all around that way, and they used to have a medley of songs, quite rousing. There's no business like show business, there's no people I know, good rousing one. Then they have something a bit softer saying, maybe it's because I'm a Londoner, but I love London town. It's bringing back the memories, people on holiday thinking back home. And then lastly, they'd often sing the Lambeth Walk. Doing the Lambeth Walk, oi! Someone else totally different, he was a German magician, Rolf Denardi. And he had his, I think it's his wife, and his 2 teenage children, I believe that's who they were. So there's 4 on stage, and he'd come on with a box, a wooden box like that, on a metal stand. He'd open the box, and at speed, really at speed, he'd pull out all these coloured scarves, one after another. And then he'd close the box, open it, it's all empty, put it back on the stand, open again. It's like all at great speed. And then he brought on the larger box, again on a metal stand, opened it up, and he'd pull out these bunches of flowers, all artificial, all the stems, and they were weighted at the bottom. So he'd throw them out, again at speed, and they'd fall on the stage and open out. And some he would give to his wife and the children, all at speed, and then suddenly, from his box, he'd pull out a great flower pot, and then more smaller bunches, and then another big pot as well, and halfway through, I'd pick it up, it's all empty, nothing in there, put it back, open the box up, and more flower pots. And it ended with the stage absolutely covered, all these brightly coloured artificial flowers. And during that performance, the music played was Tulips from Amsterdam. I think it's 1964, was it, when Roy Hudd, he'd been at Butlins as a red coat, who was engaged with the ocean as the star. Sort of unknown, full of exuberance and humour. And it's at the age then when frozen foods were just becoming popular. One of the early things to be frozen was garden peas. And that one of the brands was called Surprise Peas. And Roy Hunt was telling a story. He said, I had to get up during the night, went down the garden, I had a surprise pea. Well, it disrupted the audience. However, next week in the East Essex Gazette newspaper, Arnold Quick, the owner and editor, in his own column, this is not the sort of humour we want here at Clacton. But Roy Hunt was engaged for the second year and a great success. And he sadly passed away now, as you know, but he came back to Westcliff many times. And once we was asked to send little notes into him, and I told that story, and he said on stage he didn't remember that story about Surprise Peas. But really, the audience, it was spontaneous and erupted. Because throughout the performance, there was a full orchestra, and they sat behind a velvet curtain, so you just saw them all from the shoulders up. Actually, I think, yes. One of the things that the comedians often picked up, they'd look up all the bad metalwork and say, it'd be a nice theatre when it's finished, because it was finished. And I don't know, but to me that stage is much wider, say, than the Princess Theatre or the Westcliff. And I say, the full orchestra alongside there. Right. And there's one of the programmes, the Ocean View of 1954, 23rd season, and it had to be what he done there. Later, when he retired, he became publican at the Brace of Pistols, public house at Bocking's-Ell. Now, I just want to pick up on Betty Martin, because Frank Adey produced the show, and that was his wife. I didn't realise that for many years afterwards. Now, Betty Martin, when she eventually retired, she lived on the seafront at Holland-on-Sea, near the Kingscliff Hotel, just beside. Unfortunately, one morning, she was getting prepared for breakfast, a fire broke out. And she did the right thing, she closed the door, ran Clacton Fire Brigade, and came and stood outside. Well, quite quickly, the fire engine with a bell, no sirens there, and a bell came along the seafront, and people started to gather, and the neighbours came out to comfort her, and very quickly the fireman had extinguished the fire. Whilst this was all going along, in the electric milk flight came the milkman, Clacton Dairies. And he pulled up outside, went round, got a pint of milk, walked up between the people, put it down on the front doorstep, picked up the empty, and walked through the people saying, good morning, as though nothing had happened. And that story was told me by the next door neighbour. Yes, as I say, we always went to each show and we used to like comparing which was the best one. Was it number 1 or was it number 2? Now this is after I'd left, but they used to have summer performances. Just look at that list there who came to Clacton. All the top stars. And the show I saw was Dick Emery. Now I must admit I was a bit disappointed because he was on television at that time with all his different characters. Do you remember Mandy? And remember the vicar and the bother boy, the skinhead? All those different characters. He couldn't do that live on stage, all that makeup, he couldn't do that. So it was a bit clouded by the sophistication of television, which took many, many weeks to do 1.5 hour show. But these are the people that have been attracted to Clacton at that time. Also, but we shouldn't, not a theatre, but we should also say the Blue Lagoon, Teddy Dobbs and his Brooklyn band. His son was one of my school teachers at Parkfield School, by the way. Again, very modern. There was neon lights on the arches in rainbow colours, and it was very popular for Blue Lagoon. And of course, we mustn't forget Butlins, huge at that time after. Just before the war and post-war, and the Gaiety Theatre, Billy Button, again he attracted all the top names to come down to Clacton and his other camps elsewhere. Oh, I mustn't forget Holland-on-Sea, must I? But Holland-on-Sea developed between the two world wars and post-war, again as a minor seaside resort. We had our own theatre built in 1934. We had our summer shows there. And in the winter time, it was a social club. It's King's Avenue, by the way, opposite the Kingscliff Hotel, down at Seawood End. And there's the theatre, 350 seats there. And one of the shows I went to was the Oval Teenies. Do you remember? We are the Oval Teenies, happy girls and boys. No more, I don't want you to walk out. Sad loss, really. If that complex was there today, it would be a wonderful centre for Holland-on-Sea. But again, it's just the wrong era. It's that 70s, 80s time when all the seaside resorts went downhill somewhat, and Holland-on-Sea became more of a residential place. And there's the shows were generally called each year the Holland Highlights. The first season, 1935, was Henry Clay's Pops. They'd come down from Galston near Great Yarmouth, and they'd been there many years. And in fact, even today, a meadow where they used to perform near the beach is still called Pops Meadow, apparently. Anyway, I don't know what happened, but Will Hammer took over the licensee of the theatre and produced, as you can see, the Holland Highlights. And they took it to the Westcliff Theatre as well. 1937, early in the season, in June, they took that show. And it says, retained after their instantaneous success. Going back to the Pops for one season, they really got involved with the holiday makers, and during the mornings they used to go on the beach and have little impromptu cricket matches and ball games, all encouraging people to come to their shows. And again, they are generally pretty well sold out as such. So at Holland-on-Sea, not many people would know about this. Now, the Holland-on-Sea beach, prior to the Second World War, was in private ownership. It belonged to the Lord of a manor. He didn't live at Holland-on-Sea, but it was leased out to various people, one of which was Mr. Walter Johnson, the local builder. And he built a series of wooden pavilions along the beach, plus bathing huts and beach huts. And you had to pay to go on the beach, and you weren't allowed to undress, what they called Mackinaw bathing. You couldn't have a big coat and undress, you had to use a bathing station. But anyway, it was very popular, and on these pavilions didn't survive the war except this one, and some might remember below Queensway. Anyone? No?
Yes.
Yes, so I thought you would. It was light blue and cream coloured, very popular. This is that pavilion. It's a little shed there, the kiddies' corner, opened up the doors, an impromptu. And Reg and Bob Young told me they knew of that performer. Right, now we're coming to our final session now, and the Town Hall building, the Operetta House, and later the Tivoli Cinema. But I want to talk about the Savoy Theatre post Second World War. And during the summer season, they had a weekly show, all brand new every week of the summer season. And we went most weeks as well. They'd had two shows, 6:30 and I think it's 8:30 was the second house. Where else will you go and see Dr. Cobb? And it's crackpots. The format was always the same for each week's show. You started off with a pair of dancers, usually female, but not always, pair of dancers, and then the compere came on, he'd have a little patter, and then he'd introduce 2 or 3 speciality acts in between. And at the end of the first half, you would have the star of the show. Then you had the interval, and then the format repeated. I always felt sorry for the dancers who started the second half, because people were often quite slow coming back from the bar, although they used to ring a bell for 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. So people were being disturbed, and the poor dancers were trying to do their routine. Speciality acts again, and then the star of the show had a longer spell for his performance, or her. Unlike today, the star never performed with anyone else, kept themselves totally to themselves. And many of the older performers, I'm sure, were doing the same act as they were doing before the war. Television was only just coming in the 50s, and with television you got an immediate thing that you've seen, but before then they could do the same act as before. Very popular was Anne Ziegler and Webster Booth, but look down the bottom right. Bottom of the bill, Morecambe Wise. And just to remind you in their younger years. So again, people like that I've seen come right up to on television their special Christmas shows. There was many performers, and again I've come to realise that in the 50s, most seaside resorts had theatres. We've seen, was it about 7 here in Clacton, replicated around the country. There was no end of different acts and performers going around the country performing. Many of which I don't remember, except the names. And again, taglines or little catchphrase. Ozzie Morris, the Welsh singing comedian. Don Arden, the impressionist. This one you will know. Arthur English, the Prince of the White Boys. And you will remember him later on television, Are You Being Served? The warehouseman. But the Prince of the White Boys, he always wore a very wide and long tie, you might remember. Arthur English. Arthur Haynes, a great comedian of that time. Gladys Morgan and Company. Who was she? I don't know. No, I don't know. But Bill Waddington, from Lancashire, known as Witty Willie. Eddie MacDonald, direct from the BBC Beauty Box. Again, I've got no memory what that might have been. An odd name, The Four Others, O-T-H-E-R-S, The Four Others, Britain's latest stage and TV stars. Tony Brent, sing and swing with him, with Tony Sanderson at the piano. Terry Wayne with his golden guitar, and Ted Loon and Company, again, one of the old timers. Billy Russell, the famous musical comedian. Another odd name, I don't know if somebody might remember, the Piddingtons. I can't see anything. They, quite special at that time, it was thought transfer. It was a husband and wife, I think, and they transferred thoughts. And once, this is nothing to do with Clacton, but at the height, they pulled off a stunt when one of them went up in an aircraft and thoughts were transferred. Don't know how it was done. There's so many I saw, I don't remember. But I remember once there was this ballad singer, singing a very nice ballad, and using his hands to emphasise. And then suddenly, he looked a bit odd. And his arms got longer and longer. And they were false hands, and he was feeding round, and his jacket was concertinas, and he ended up waiting. And then there's a strong man, an elderly man he was, I think he might have been German, great beard, and part of his act at the end, he went off stage and he rolled on a wagon wheel, about chin height, solid wooden, and he lifted it up and he banged it on the stage. How that didn't go with the boarding, I don't know. So he had this great, and you could tell by the weight, by the sound it made. And he got a helmet, strapped it on with a spike. He had 4 assistants to lift the wheel, wagon wheel, onto the spike. And then he started to turn it, and faster, and faster. And his neck was gyrating. He must have done permanent damage in later years. But it's I always remember that act. And another one, can't remember the details, but it was in a laboratory, and you had the scientist in this white lab coat, and he created a robot. At the end of this act, the robot was the actual man, and the scientist just disappeared down into nothing. How they transferred over, I did see it once on television years and years ago. I've only ever seen it twice. Once it was Savoy, and they had the music. It was quite special how they built it up, how they transferred what you thought was a robot really was a scientist. Now, some other people I saw, some better known names. Ronnie Rinaldi. If I were a blackbird, I'd whistle and sing. He could whistle. David Burglass, the magician, of the old school, O'Tine Tales. Very clever he was. And for the young people, David Whitfield, vocalist, popular with the women and girls. He would be like the Ed Sheeran of today, David Whitfield. And then you had exponents of the silly walk. People like Max Wall with his tights on, he had very thin legs, and he'd do the silly walk. But very clever routine. And another one who did the same, Billy Dainty. Yes, remember Billy Dainty. Now this person, I don't know if I saw it at Clacton, but I mentioned it. Hilda Baker. Yes, good. She was a light comedian, dressed very old-fashioned. She used to have a fox fur. She's a short lady, and she had a stooge lady, a very tall lady, except it was actually a man who never spoke. But Hilda held a conversation, and obviously little things went wrong, and Hilda, one of her catchphrases was, "And what did I say?" I said, "Be soon." That one. And the stooge would just... And at the end of the act, Hilda would say, "She knows, you know," and at the end of the act. If I can digress, we used to listen to Wireless a lot, and Charlie Chester. Cheerful Charlie Chester, I used to call him. He had a weekly programme, and one of the routines was a very topical little couplet, I think that's the word one would say, couplet, topical, and it's done to the sound of the African tom-toms. Down in the jungle, living in a tent, better than the prefab, no rent. And now, you all know Albert Scott from Clacton, schoolboy during the Second World War. He told me this one, which I can't remember. Obviously there was a strike in London at that time. And going to the tom-toms, Smithfield Market meat strike. What a load of rot. No meat anyway, so what? Going back to the Savoy, things that made us laugh really. There's a couple on, they're talking about the wireless. And I talked, because in those days it was the light programme or the home service. Or you could get Radio Luxembourg, couldn't you? But the sound kept disappearing. But it was a light programme on the home service, anyway, on the wireless. And they would talk to each other, and he said, "I bet you can't make a wireless set out of 3 wires." And the other one said, "Well, I don't, let me have a go." So he